I've never seen like passion like it. And it's so interesting, but so exciting and fun to be part of.
Joining us now, she's the Vice President of Sporting for the NWSL and a former player for the New Zealand national team, earning 100 caps, playing in all of the Ferns matches in the 2011 and 2015 World Cups, and playing in the 2012 and 2016 Olympics and 2019 World Cup. She worked in global strategy and policy leadership at FIFPro before joining the NWSL in 2024. She loves a cheesy Christmas sweater, and our names are spelled the same, but I'm Sarah, and she's Sarah. It's Sarah Gregorius. How was my Kiwi accent?
You know what? Pretty good. I've definitely heard worse.
Well, I mean, New Zealand is my opt-out plan if America continues on the path it's on. So I need to ingratiate myself to the Kiwis. I love it there so much.
I'm a little bit biased, but yes, it's definitely the best place in the world.
In the whole world. It's so beautiful. I love it so much. And yet you're here in the U.S. to help make our league the best in the world. So thanks for joining us. Congrats on your promotion, named VP of Sporting just a few weeks ago. And you just, as we were getting ready for the show, told us how you were welcomed into your new position by your staff. Can you share that story?
Yeah, of course. They'll be thrilled that they've made the podcast. No, I took, right before the start of the NWSL season, I took a couple of weeks to go back to New Zealand. Hadn't been home in a couple of years and wanted to take the opportunity to do that. And while I was away, my team got 140 tiny little ducks, and they decorated my new office, put them everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Like they were on my desk, of course, but there's also some on the ceiling, in drawers, everywhere. And I had a little sticky note on my desk when I got back, and it said, "Welcome back, boss. While you're away, we got all of your ducks in a row," which I think was like not only creative, but also a little bit endearing. I'm glad that they felt that they could do that.
Yeah, it seems like you must have a great relationship. Hard to say whether they were decorating or pranking you, but I appreciate the thought nonetheless. What part of New Zealand did you get back to?
Wellington. I grew up in Wellington, and my parents are still there with quite a few of my friends. So that's home for me.
Cool. I got to go to Wellington for some of the World Cup matches when I was out there, so I got to see your home. It's very cute. Yeah.
Did you watch were you there for the Japan-Spain game? That was in Wellington. Remember that one in the group stage?
No, I can't remember who I was watching. Can I tell you that I made the mistake of leaving my sunglasses at home, and that stadium, I literally was basically getting like a reflection from the surface of the sun directly into my eyes. So I think I've blacked out most of what I was watching. What were you going to point out about that one?
No, just that it was a brilliant game. It was one of the games of the group stage. And it was in Wellington. I was there as well.
I think I'd remember if I saw my Spain team that I claim just due to my last name and no other connection whatsoever. So I don't think I was at that one. But what a cool stadium. What a cool place. So let's talk about this new VP of Sporting role. What excites you most about the job?
Well, it is a very interesting job because the remit is basically to be the caretaker and the person who is tasked with managing the sporting health of the league, which is really the on-field product. So for someone like myself, you already mentioned it with my background and my experience as a player, to be in a position to really affect and impact, that is huge. I take that responsibility very seriously, and I also really enjoy it. It's been a ton of fun so far. It means that I can work with all of the clubs across the NWSL, all of our partners, stakeholders, work with the team internally to make sure that we're looking at the right things, coming up with the right initiatives, the right programming to support like the on-field health of the league. And it is really just a great opportunity to enhance the role that this league plays, not only within the US sports ecosystem, but also the global women's football ecosystem, which, you know, the US, whether it's the national team or the NWSL or the leagues that have been here in the past, has always played such a leadership role in the game. So to be in this position, to be in this seat is brilliant. I'm really enjoying it. There's so many things about it that excite me.
I think a lot of folks might not even be entirely clear on what a sporting role is at a team, but certainly not what it really entails at the league level. So can you tell us a little bit more about the specific responsibilities?
Sure. Within our group, we look after everything from medical and high performance all the way through to officiating. We play a role in helping manage the talent pipeline, so player development, our sporting staff support, so head coaches, the sporting executives, all the way through to the data analysts and the performance staff at the clubs. We play a governance role in and across all of that. It's a really broad space. There's so many different ways that you can impact and affect that. And one of the other things that I do, which is very interesting, is, what is unique perhaps about women's soccer and women's football is it's a global game. Some of the other American sports don't have that particular context. So a lot of my work is also around like how we interact with global football, the global football governance framework, and making sure that our interests and our needs are represented on that stage as well, and that we're advocating for the things that make sense for our players and our clubs to really thrive. So we can go into a whole bunch of different areas, but I think what's really important to remember is, the NWSL is a sports league. So it is really at the center of everything that we're doing, and trying to progress and promote and protect the game is really what it's about. But it touches really like a number of different areas.
Yeah, you got a big job. And more so than ever of late in the last couple of years, the relationship between the NWSL and global women's soccer has changed, just with the amount of players going back and forth, coming to the league and going to other leagues. The questions about the footprint and the schedule and how it interacts with the rest of the world of sport is much more complicated than in other sports, where the U.S. declares itself champions of the world when we win, even if we're not playing the world. The soccer world is very different, and there's a lot of that communication that needs to go on. You just mentioned it. Sport is at the center of everything you do. And, one criticism of the NWSL's front office in the past has been what sometimes can feel like a disconnect between the league and the actual product of soccer. It feels like you can play a really big role in making sure that the front office feels informed and educated and passionate about the sport itself. Is that a priority for you in this job?
Totally. It really is. And we're sort of operating now with this virtuous cycle and this flywheel where you have a great sporting product, which means bigger audiences, which means greater revenue, which circles back around to, a better sporting product because it can all be reinvested into the game. So that is hugely critically important that we keep that focus. And of course, there's an element of, mainstreaming sporting insights and sporting conversations into the broader business, because there is, and I actually think this is really healthy, a natural tension between sporting and business, right? Like even for the sake of and we know this occurs in other sports as well. Like, how do you build the game in a way that makes sense for not only the in-stadia experience, but also the TV experience? How do you make sure that the players can still thrive in that environment and perform at their peak? So those conversations are really ongoing, but I actually really enjoy that part of it as well. And I do think that past criticism has probably been very fair. The NWSL had its first chief sporting director only begin in January of 2023, for example, and the league has existed for a lot longer than that. So I'm never one to shy away from the history and the past. I think there's huge learnings to be taken, and the league has actively decided to not have that repeat itself by having people sitting in the type of position that I have now that really manage that, not only from like an internal mainstreaming of the right topics across the board, but also to make sure that we are proactively planning on how we build on the product that we have and future-proof it against what's to come in the industry, but also, in a really exciting and innovative way as well.
Yeah. So smart. And centering the soccer being played in the marketing and promotion and selling of the league is a huge part of it too. And that'll only be easier for the NWSL to do when it's supported by all the work that you're doing, the insights that you're coming up with. American fans are interesting. There are a lot of less informed American fans when it comes to the game of footy because it hasn't always been traditionally our go-to. And yet the ones that are informed are so passionate and outspoken that their demand for the league to share the insights and to reveal what it's working on when it comes to centering the sport can seem outsized and louder than maybe even the number of people calling for it. But when you can answer that and say, here's all the things we're doing and here's the job that I have, it's great. It's really fantastic. And you haven't been with the league long, just since 2024, but there's been a lot of growth and change even in that short time. What are some of the areas where you've really noticed it most that the league is changing?
Oh, great question. I think there's been a really interesting pivot towards wanting to focus more on player health and innovation around that, and looking, I obviously acknowledge, like, particularly given like what my role was prior to coming to the NWSL, obviously acknowledge that player care was never front and center for the NWSL for a long time. And I think going through what the league and what the players and the clubs went through, and then arriving now at a point where parts of the conversation are certainly now about like, how can we do more? How can we do more for the players? How can we invest in their health? How can we invest in the term that I like to use rather than injury prevention or anything like that is how do we increase player availability? Yeah. And that obviously goes into wanting to mitigate and prevent injury, but it also goes into career longevity. How can we have great players playing brilliant football over a longer period of time? And I think there's been a really exciting and interesting pivot in that regard. And I'm hugely passionate personally about that particular area. And I'm really proud that the league is taking steps to invest in it. I also think the league is working really hard, and we're obviously at the forefront of this. And it's critically important if you're evaluating sporting performance is better understanding data and having an infrastructure that can support the ingestion of data from multiple sources, and then being in a position to really churn out meaningful, individualized insights. And I don't mean individualized insights from like an individual player perspective, but individual to the sport of women's football. And we know that there just is not enough research and not enough understanding about that particularly from the lens of the athlete. So I'm really looking forward to continuing that work. And we've done some great foundational movements over the past 18 months, I think, in particular. And I'm excited for that to grow further and for us to then pivot into really driving some, innovations in that space and not just, like I've said before, individualized towards individual players, but we have to wrap our arms around the people that take care of the players, the support staff that are working in the clubs. I think we're also taking a number of really positive steps to better support the technical and sporting staffs at the leagues, knowing how much influence they have on the players and therefore on the sporting product. So those are areas that I'm really excited about. But I mean, I could just talk about so many other things. I mean, you talked about the American fan, and I think the attitude towards women's soccer here is actually in general, whether it's from fans to the boardroom, is actually so interesting and so exciting. There's passion and ambition that I haven't seen replicated really in other parts of the world. And I don't care what people's entry point is into the game. I think over here, people really fall in love with it. They fall in love with the success. They fall in love with the players. They fall in love with the atmosphere, the inclusion, the vibes that it creates. And it's the same with then turning that into, meaningful and impactful investment as well, whether that's as a fan or as an owner or investor. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because I think it's kind of the other side of the coin to that whole fan conversation is I've never seen passion like it. And it's so interesting, but so exciting and fun to be part of.
Yeah, we get spoiled over here, and then athletes from other countries come over and talk about the different level of investment and care and training facility and everything else. And it's really something to be proud of. And, I will say the greater the investment into this league and the teams, the more it allows the league to focus on and have the bandwidth to care about players in ways that I think you have to understand it's your product. And also folks have to understand that when you have a league that is just starting out, you are pulled in 8 million directions at once. And so trying to figure out how to stay afloat, market, pay people, do the things you wouldn't think that the player would fall through the cracks, but sometimes the simplest thing, which is the product on the field, feels like the thing you don't have to pay as much attention to as everything behind the scenes that's falling apart. And now I think with all the research being done into women's sports and women athletes in particular, you can marry that with the investment into these teams and really start to create these incredibly stellar environments for people to thrive and to be their best players, which is so exciting. You said you care particularly about advocating for athletes, and in your previous job at FIFPro, that was a big part of it. And I think that goes way, way back because I've heard you say in interviews that you grew up as a bit of a troublemaker and always willing to push back a little bit. So before we even get to how that manifests in your career, I wonder if you have a good example, maybe one of those stories that the family likes to retell over and over about naughty young Sarah.
Yeah, I have a few, to be honest. I am a middle child, and I grew up between two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. And you can't really see it on this interview, but I'm not very big. I'm about 5'0". I don't have a lot of size, and it became very apparent when I was growing up that I couldn't compete with my brothers physically, so I had to outsmart them and outwit them. The story that my mum likes to tell is there was a bike in the backyard, and the three of us wanted to ride it. My older brothers were really fighting about it. And rather than engaging in the fight, while they were preoccupied, like sort of attempting to throw punches and really have it out, I just snuck around the side, picked up the bike and went off. And I found a way to like have my little play on it, return it. They hadn't even noticed and they continued to fight about it. And the reason why I think that translates a little bit into what's ended up becoming my career is there's always a way forwards, and there's always a way to get positive outcomes and to get positive momentum. Sometimes it just doesn't look like the most obvious way forwards, but it's about taking a moment and taking the opportunity to get something that you desire. And that's yes, I was a bit of a troublemaker throughout my playing career in terms of wanting to stand up for myself and standing up for my teammates, the players, but I was never one that tried to burn things to the ground. I was always one to try and maneuver within the system and try and find a way forwards without burning too many bridges.
Well, what that anecdote also made me think of is not always, but stereotypical male versus female leadership, right?
Yes.
You went and fixed the problem instead of fighting over the problem. This coming from a country of New Zealand that has multiple female prime ministers that have been at the head of the country, while we here toil away without ever having handed over the reins to a woman, to see how that might go. But I digress. Back to you being a troublemaker with an intentional nature to you. Your teammates kind of figured out pretty early that you were willing to speak up for players and fight for resources and respect and stuff. When did you first realize that advocacy was something that came sort of naturally for you?
Probably when I was already doing it. It was not really something that I ever sought out. I think, when you're in a team environment, you play the role that not so much is handed to you, but the one that is going to be most effective, whether that's on the field or off the field. And as a teammate and as a person who was also interested, and I think at times, to be honest, somewhat confused by our treatment, I wanted to solve it. And I was always part of those discussions that we would have as like a team or a leadership group on how to address certain things, to better support us and to better support our performance. And probably in those conversations, they just decided that, you know what, you're talking a lot in here. Why don't you talk a lot out there and take this conversation forwards for us? And actually, as I sort of said earlier, I didn't mind doing it. I wanted to follow the breadcrumbs and figure out actually like what was really going on and if we could find like workable solutions to improve things. Most of the time, people don't have bad intent. They just have a lack of understanding as well. So I don't want to give the impression that I was like kicking down doors or like, putting my foot on anybody's throat in order to get things done. It was actually really about like that advocacy, but also trying to sit down and figure out solutions. And, I got a lot of experience as I was playing, particularly for my national team, about like collective bargaining and negotiations and labor relations and the role that employers and employees can play in improving those structures in and around the game and in and around a football team. That was really how it all came about. I wouldn't change it for the world. I think it was a reflection on who I was as a person and as a teammate, but it's also shaped me a lot. And I don't think I'd be sitting here without those experiences.
Yeah, I think there are people, myself included, that have a natural interest in understanding why things are the way they are, especially if they're not equal or fair, and being really driven by a desire to see justice across either your own life or the lives of others. And that takes you down a path of like better understanding why things ended up the way they are and how you can change them. You mentioned FIF Pro, you were there kind of while you were still playing and then right after you retired. I wonder what some of the biggest things you learned from your time there was, because you're representing players across the globe, sort of like the worldwide union for footballers, and you take a lot of that role and dilute it down to just the NWSL in the role that you have now, trying to figure out how to serve the players that make up the sport.
The work at FIF Pro was fascinating because I got an opportunity to work with different cultures, but I also worked across the whole spectrum of the football industry. So we still supported some of the leading countries and the leading federations, leading leagues with their collective agreements, with their representation. but you also had some really difficult positions and some really difficult situations that we also dealt with for players at the total other end of the spectrum. So day to day, week to week, it was fascinating. It always looked different. It was also very hard emotionally at times to be faced with some of those challenges. I mean, some things made it into the public domain and others didn't. And then the other piece of it was which is what I'm bringing to the NWSL as well, is just understanding the international football governance framework, what it means to work with the confederations and with FIFA and with the other representative collective bodies, whether that's the European, what used to be the European Club Association, and all of those organizations, to try and figure out, okay, collectively, how do we progress this game? How do we move it forwards? How do I make sure that players are right at the heart of those decisions? What are the positions? What's the research that we need to do in order to underpin it? So it was a little bit like this role. It was hugely diverse, working across the spectrum of people, organizations, and challenges, but it was a great introduction to the world of football governance. And I'm really proud of the progress that we were able to make and the impact that we had on behalf of the players. And I think FIFA is such a brilliant organization and so important for the game.
You know, you mentioned your work at FIFPro in a previous interview sort of felt akin to social justice work at times in the way that you were advocating for athletes. Do you see that you're able to still apply that filter to your work with the NWSL and potentially even helping give the league itself a voice and a perspective that isn't just soccer, but is about more than just that, particularly in the way it represents women at a time like this in our country?
Definitely. And I really, like, sometimes I think it's maybe underestimated, and I don't think it can be overstated how important America, the United States of America, is to women's football and is to the ongoing progress and professionalization of the game. Whether that's the legacy that's been created by the US women's national team and the equal pay agreement that they reached, whether it's the NWSL and groundbreaking CBAs, but also, you know, breaking a lot of records, whether it's attendance or sponsorship revenue, whatever, media deals, whatever it may be, it pulls the rest of the industry along. And I do think it's really important to always remind ourselves of the role that we play rather than getting too insulated and just thinking about it in the context of our own backyard here in the US. So, and that actually, I know that the NWSL provides inspiration to other players around the world, whether that's to play here, whether that's to have the types of rights afforded to players here. So maybe it doesn't feel like it's consistently social justice work, but I think the impact and the example that the NWSL can set should not be taken for granted. And should be factored in to how we innovate and how we therefore lead the game forwards.
Yeah, I think women athletes and women's leagues, particularly right now in our current state, have an incredible amount of power in showing representations of women that are in opposition to where some folks would like us to be forced back into the lanes and the spaces that they believe in which we belong. You know, when I joined the ownership group for the Chicago Stars, which I was part of for a couple of years, it occurred to me that I was suddenly, quote unquote, the man. And I had spent so much of my career pushing back on the man and demanding better for athletes and asking for accountability from higher ups when they failed or didn't do what I thought was right. And I wonder how you consider your role representing kind of the man now instead of fighting against the, you know, larger him with a capital H.
I had a few comments when I made the decision to join the league, which is the employer side of things, that I'd gone to the dark side. And my response to that was like, I mean, how good? Create chaos and create change from within. Right? It's actually a very effective path. Not that I'm here, if my boss is listening, not that I'm here to create chaos by any stretch. But again, as I said earlier, if you have the attitude of wanting to follow the breadcrumbs and understand how decisions are being made and therefore like where you can be to be impactful, it does lead you to a league governance role. And so it's not, like, I personally don't think being on this side of things means that my mission or my values has to change. It's just a different operating environment.
Yeah. And the perspective you might need to get it done better.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, what's the language that makes sense to people working in this space? Because it's different to the language that you might use with players or with player associations or player representatives. So it's also like, adapting and changing how I approach things, the narrative that I present, but not to fundamentally change who I am or what the goals or what the needs of the industry are. So it's at a very personal level. It's also part of the extension of my growth and my development as a person within my career as well. So it doesn't feel like I'm working for the man. It just feels like I'm in another environment where I'm learning how to grow this game and how to progress it sustainably. Yeah, that's really, I hope that answers your question. That's really my attitude towards it.
Well, and it just, from what I've gathered from you here and what I've heard about you from others and read about you, like, I'm just extremely excited to see what you do in this role and the ways that you can help make this league, the best in the world. The last question I want to ask you is about competition, because I know part of your role is improving competition and player experience and performance. What do you make of the first couple weeks of the season?
Well, what's really interesting is we've hired within the sporting team just recently the very first senior manager of officiating. And he's been busy so far.
Yeah, a couple red cards, more than half of last year's total in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, which I think, this league talks off a lot about how competitive it all is. And I think you're seeing players are certainly leaving it all out there. What I'm really interested in seeing the development across this year in particular is, we've got so many coaches from all over the world playing in the league now, on top of some really exciting players. And I think with a couple of teams in particular, you're starting to see more diversity in the style of play because these coaches have come in and they've had time to work with their players. And to me, that's really interesting. And I think it's great for the league as a global league and as a destination league that there are different styles of play emerging. There are clubs that are working really hard on their identity and their playing philosophy as well. And that's coming through. Not to mention, there's maybe it seems obvious to me, but it's probably worth saying, we're a year out from the Women's World Cup. All of the players, and I've certainly seen this in the individual performances of some players, are trying to get, their butts on a seat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, butts on a seat to go to Brazil next year and be part of that. So I think as the season goes on, we're also going to see some players working so hard to find form. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah,
if I was a national team coach, I would be both excited and probably a little bit dismayed at how difficult my decisions are going to have to be leading into that competition, because we know as qualification wraps up that all eyes are going to be on Brazil next year, and this league's role in developing players and being a place where players are playing well to not only push to get into national teams but then to perform on the world stage. That's another thing that I'm really looking forward to, and it's always unique the year before a Women's World Cup.
Yeah. Well, my eyes are also on Brazil, and I would like a butt in the seat covering it. So sponsors, I hope you've got your eye on the work we're doing here and the ways we're really pushing our performance to make sure we've got a spot. I've still never been to South America, so which sponsor will be the one that helps open my horizons and send me on a plane? Sarah, it was so great to talk to you. I'm genuinely so enthusiastic for what you're going to do with the league and really appreciate you giving us some time.
No, thank you for the conversation. Great questions. I hope you get a sponsor and we see you in Brazil next year. It's going to be massive.